Okay. Well, as I've said, welcome everybody. I'd just like to remind you about the code of conduct for NASUWT events. It was on in the waiting room whilst you were waiting to come in. So just to remind you about that. This is our webinar for the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and Girls. The UN is marking the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence between the 25th of November and the 10th of December under the global theme Unite to End Digital Violence Against Women and Girls. And we've got some fantastic speakers for you to listen to and engage with today. Speaking of engagement with them, if you could put any questions in the Q&A box, please, not the chat box, so I can monitor them and we will take questions at the end. So what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce our panelists and then we're going to hear from them. Again, questions as they come to you in the Q&A box, or you can wait till the end. Either it's up to you. So we're going to start with Sally. Sally Rees is a drama teacher and leader of learning for creative and expressive arts with 30 years of experience in education. She's currently past president of NASUWT for Northern Ireland and vice chair of the National Women's Advisory Committee. She also sits on the Northern Ireland Irish Congress of Trade Unions Women Committee, and following a successful campaign with the NASUWT to make upskirting a criminal sexual offence in Northern Ireland, she continues to lobby, campaign and advocate against sexual harassment in all its forms. Sally works with the NASUWT Sexual Harassment Task Group and is a designated support officer. And she's also passionate about ending violence against women and girls, working to hold authority and institutions to account and to empower others to stand up against all forms of violence and harassment. So Sally, I'm going to pass over to you.
Thank you, Claire. Good evening, everyone. It's lovely to be here with you. Some of you may have heard my story already, but for those of you who don't know, in 2016, the police arrived at my school to tell me that a USB had been found containing images that had been filmed up my skirt of me and another colleague. And what followed, I suppose, changed the trajectory of my life quite considerably. First of all, becoming and being called a victim was something that was not part of who I am or who I thought I was. But basically, I assumed the school would expel the pupil. They didn't expel him. In fact, they expected me to teach him. And as we know, we can't refuse to teach a pupil. And their solution was to take me off the class as opposed to taking him out of my class. So they denied the other pupils in that class the right to the expert, not just in the school who taught drama and performing arts, but also in Northern Ireland, as I wrote the A-level specification for the subject. To add insult to injury, they then made him a prefect of film. So I had to basically, along with a colleague, put up with 18 months sharing the same space in the same school as the pupil who had sexually assaulted me and another teacher. The issues that we faced were ultimately that the school did not recognise it as a sexual assault. They managed the risk in terms of the risk of the pupil reoffending rather than the risk to the mental, emotional and physical well-being of me and my colleague. Also, that tantamount to all of their decisions at every meeting and every discussion was his right to education, which superseded my right and my colleagues' right to feel safe and be treated with dignity and respect in our workplace. And ultimately, the child protection policy in school also created an environment of silence because the child protection policy protected, in this case, the perpetrator rather than the victim. We weren't allowed to say who it was. We weren't allowed to mention his name. We weren't allowed to talk to our colleagues who all of a sudden had seen a change in our behaviour but didn't know why. And this perpetuated a cycle of rumours and gossip among the staff and the wider community of where I live in Northern Ireland. Enniskillen is a very small place. So this kind of idea that the rights of the pupil and the child, who was 16 at the time, was replicated in our fight in law, not just his rights, but also the fact that the law didn't recognise that upskirting was a sexual assault or a sexual offence. So we then faced a legal battle, and thanks to the NSUWT, they took a judicial review to challenge the PPS over here their first decision not to prosecute the pupil based on the fact that they said it wasn't voyeurism and it wasn't outrage in public decency because school isn't a public place. So key to that was then the judicial review overturned the decision, and in the February of 2019, the 27th of February 2019, the pupil was found guilty of 5 counts of outrage in public decency. Now, the issue we have with that is that law is the fact that you would be outraged. If you'd seen him do it, you would be outraged by what he did. Didn't give justice to me or my colleague for actually the complete violation of our dignity and objectification of us and the sexual assault that had been committed against us. So we then fought a very successful campaign with the NASUWT and lobbied for the change in the law in Northern Ireland, and that was successfully introduced in November. It also of 2023. It includes a clause that says whether or not the offence was sexually motivated, it would be reckless for you to commit the offence, because at every single level, whether it was in school or in the law or with the police, what we faced was institutionalised misogyny, which didn't recognise what had happened to us as a sexual assault. So in terms of how we resolve this in society and in our schools, we know that every government now has a strategy to end violence against women and girls. But sometimes people, when they talk about violence against women and girls, they only recognise that as being violence at the top of the spectrum. And they don't actually recognise that actually what we need to do, if we look at the pyramid of sexual violence, is we actually need to strip away those behaviours at the bottom. It's like a game of Jenga. We have to take out this sexual banter, this objectification of women and girls, this notion that boys will be boys, which was central to our case. You know, his defence was that he didn't mean it. It was a funny prank. He didn't mean any harm. That secured us the recklessness clause, which makes our law more effective and stronger than the one in the UK. But the key to that, I suppose, is how do we make our workplaces safer for women and girls, and how do we ensure a trauma-informed approach? And I suppose the first thing is we all know that sexual harassment is rife in our schools at the minute. We've had several reports within the NSUWT about, you know, teachers being barked at, girls are reporting upskirting is rife, and also this sort of cyber flashing and all of the other elements of sexual abuse that are happening. And it's happening in words. It's happening online and abusive messages. We're dealing with casework here in Northern Ireland around, you know, teachers being sent sexually explicit messages, and yet still the principals and the school leaders and the governors are refusing to accept that that is sexual harassment and abuse, even though by definition it is unwanted. It is sexual in nature and it is humiliating and degrading to that teacher. We have to do more in our schools to educate not just the pupils, because there's a lot of focus on robust relationship and sexuality education, which I believe is really fundamental. It all has to start by understanding consent and what consent looks like, but we also need to shift the focus away, or we need to shift the focus to what the victim's experience is and the survivors and the impact it has on them. An impact that we think about is the trajectory of trauma. Nobody in my school looked at what trauma looked like in somebody who'd been sexually assaulted. They failed to recognize that avoidance, that hypervigilance, that flight, fear, fight, freeze response or fawning were all part of the trajectory of emotions that we experienced, and just being too terrified to go into school. They couldn't understand that that is what our body was telling us, because the body holds the score. And I think there needs to be more education for our school leaders and our governors around recognising what exactly sexual harassment is in all its forms, how it has to be tackled, and we need to be pushing for, as a trade union, the introduction of mandatory training for school leaders and governors, and also an education training piece for all staff that looks at what sexual harassment is, not just for the staff, but also the girls and women who are also experiencing it in our schools. And I think that's something we really need to focus on. And then the other aspect of that, I believe, is that we need to look at changing attitudes and beliefs within our wider society. We are in the business of education. It is not enough, and it is doing our boys a disservice to say boys will be boys, and this is just our expectation of how they will treat women and girls. And also, an element to me is if you don't look at how your behaviour policy and your sexual harassment policy and your duty of care to your staff converge, then actually you're doing a disservice to everybody. So just to finish with, I think what we need to also look at is that bigger education piece around um, healthy masculinities and also introducing the bystander approach. So we're equipping young people with the tools to take collective action to break some of the narratives within their peer cultures that make these types of behaviour acceptable. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sally. I forgot I'd muted myself. So I'm talking away to you and I was turned off. But thank you very much for that. There have been a couple of comments and questions put in the Q&A box, but we'll come to those near to the end, if that's all right. Our second speaker is Kat Downs. Kat's been a member of NASUWT since she started teaching in 2006. Teaching maths in an inner city secondary school in Leeds. She's an experienced rep and caseworker and has been a member of the NASUWT Disabled Teacher Advisory Committee for over 10 years. She's been the Vice President of Disabled Teachers for several years and has just been re-elected to represent the NASUWT on the TUC Disabled Workers Committee. Kat regularly writes and speaks on motions in a range of different settings and has led workshops and training during that time on a range of topics such as ableism, neurodiversity, social model of disability, LGBTI issues, occupational health and risk assessments. She was awarded Best Engagement with Underrepresented Groups at conference in 2025 and has recently had her first article published in the Chartered College of Teaching Impact Journal, the online edition, on the social model of disability within the classroom, alongside writing blogs during 2024 for Bradford Research School and Education Support on Equality Issues within schools. Her pronouns are she and they. And for those of you who need a visual description, she's an electric wheelchair user with long, bright green and black hair. I can't see the green that much tonight, Kat. And she has an eclectic taste in outfits, but she's looking very, very, very moderated today. So I'll pass over to you, Kat.
Thank you. You can't see the dinosaurs on screen, but I've got dinosaurs on today. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is a concerning issue. So obviously in my roles on the disabled committees, we are getting quite concerned about some of the reports that we are hearing of the experience of disabled people in light of the increasing rhetoric in the media and the government current rhetoric on disabled people and neurodivergent people. To just put you a little bit in the picture, a few statistics. Disabled women, that element of intersectionality. If you're a woman and you're disabled, you're twice as likely to experience violence, sexual abuse, physical abuse as non-disabled women. Non-disabled women. And some of that comes from very different kind of issues relating to disability and the way that this country provides for disabled people. So some of those experiences will be things like withholding medication, withholding mobility aids, using care needs to control people and coerce them into doing things. And so disabled women can often find themselves in a situation where they're actually trapped in a circumstance and it's much harder for them to leave than it might be for a non-disabled woman. They're disproportionately affected by economic instability. So many of our disabled teachers are supply teachers, and they will experience that economic instability. So if you're relying on a partner who is abusive and you're economically not stable in terms of economics, and you've not got that finances coming in, it can be very, very difficult compared to a non-disabled person to be able to leave that partner. It's also very difficult to then get the same standard of care. It takes very long time to get that through social care. Disabled women can find themselves trapped in situations and there is not the support in place for them to be able to leave as there is for non-disabled. 31% of disabled women live with their abuser, which is a lot higher than for non-disabled people. And that abuser may not necessarily just be a partner. It's highly likely to be a carer, it could be a relative, it could be a parent. So lots of different kind of settings that disabled women can find themselves in that may be slightly different to non-disabled women. It's also recognised that it's a global issue with across the world, 2 to 5 times more likely that disabled women will experience violence to a non-disabled women, which is quite a shocking statistic. In terms of reporting, we already know that in terms of disability hate crime, there is massive underreporting. There are lots of different reasons for this. One is particularly because lots of reports, including the Casey review, have identified that the police force is unconsciously biased towards disabled people and less likely to be supportive of them than a non-disabled person. I'd even go as far to say there are some police forces across the UK where we know there's been that recent Panorama case where lots of people have mentioned the fact that they were misogynistic and all of those things, but very few people have identified that they are extremely ableist, and the Charing Cross station very clearly was quite institutionalised there as well. And there's a failure from government to actually tackle some of these things. So disabled people are very scared to go and report these things because they are not taken seriously and there's not that specialist support in place. Even though when you report something as a hate crime, you're supposed to be put through to a specialist officer, quite often they are still experiencing a lack of support and a lot of kind of bias against them. The actual prosecutions are quite low as well of disability hate crime, and so a lot of disabled people are very frightened to go to the police anyway, and we know that this is a barrier that we need to overcome. But in government, there's been a recent vote to try and improve the prosecutions of disability hate crime and make it equal to other crimes. But unfortunately, the vote doesn't really go strong. It didn't really go far enough. So one of the things that would be really good is Inclusion London and I think Disability Sheffield. They're both running campaigns, and MenCap I think as well, to increase the disability hate crime protections. So they have lots of petitions out. So if you feel like you can go and sign one of those petitions, please do, because that will do a lot to support some of the violence that our disabled women are facing. There's also a bit of an additional layer to that. It's not just coming in the home. We've got members reporting that they're parking in disabled bays and getting questioned. And if you're a female and you're on your own and you're parking in a blue badge bay and you're getting targeted as to with abuse of, well, should you park there? Is it a Motability car? These are all experiences that are coming out after the recent changes to Motability. And some of those changes, the way that it was put forward is the government were not actually, it was a bit of like, I want to say propaganda, but that sounds a bit extreme. But they weren't actually telling the full story. They were just telling what would suit kind of their reasons for being able to change Motability. One of the things I would have said if I'd have had the chance to speak to the MP is, why are we not targeting a CEO who's on like over £700,000 a year last year was his take-home pay? Why are we targeting vulnerable people and vulnerable disabled people with a need that we need? If a disabled person can't get on a bus, what option do we have to get to work? If a disabled woman is more likely to be targeted for abuse, that's probably going to put, like, I won't get on the bus because of that reason. We're taking away cars, potentially restricting cars that make disabled people feel safe and allow them to access work. So this rhetoric's been really, really dangerous. We're also seeing toilets being policed as well. Disabled toilets, the increase in those are being policed and people being questioned as to why they need to use that toilet by non-disabled people, which, most disabilities are invisible and nobody should be questioned about their use of a toilet. But we're seeing kind of that increase in rhetoric and disabled people being challenged and an increase in that aggression and violence. And some of those people that are targeting people are being very violent and aggressive. There's also somebody there's quite a number of right-wing people on Instagram and on Twitter who are running what they call, check this person, check if they've got a Motability car, and then if you think they don't need it, report it. So the whole world is a very scary place, and I could not imagine if I was also a disabled person experiencing physical violence, how all of that picture would just really kind of keep you in a situation that you shouldn't have to stay in. I also wanted to just touch a very little bit on LGBT experiences at the moment. Hate crime for for LGBT people is very similar, I think, in terms of rates for disabled people and the way that it's underreported for the same reasons. As disabled people, we know that there is institutionalized homophobia and transphobia and biphobia in the police, and that puts a lot of people off reporting. Just a few kind of stats, bisexual women, they're 3 times, I think, more likely to experience higher rates of coercive control by a partner, and overall 3 times more likely to experience domestic violence compared to non-LGBT. And the rates for domestic violence for lesbian women are also extremely high as well. So it's just something that really needs to put pressure on the government to strengthen support systems in place, because there are still women that are being denied access to the support they need, particularly when you come to disabled people, and in terms of women's shelters, they don't always have the same access to accessible or adapted accommodations. So if you've got to leave home quickly, that's not something you can necessarily do as a disabled person. So putting pressure on the government to make sure that if you are disabled, there is proper adapted provision for you, if in terms of women's shelters and safe spaces, is also really important as well. So yeah, I think that's just about 7 minutes, so I'm going to stop.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kat, for that. Just a reminder to everybody, can you please put your questions in the Q&A box for the end of the session, not in the chat box, in the Q&A, please. But brilliant, Kat. Thank you very much for that. Now we're moving on to David Wright, CBE, who is the CEO for Southwest Grid for Learning. And this is quite an impressive bio, David, I've got to say. So David is CEO at Southwest Grid for Learning and Director of UK Safer Internet Centre, which is the National Awareness Centre and part of the European InSafe network. He's worked extensively in online safety for over 20 years and was appointed as CBE in 2024 King's Birthday Honours List for services to the safety of children and young people. So congratulations on that, David. He advises a number of governments, organisations and industry partners on online safety strategy and policy, and has been appointed as an expert child online protection advisor to the UNITU and nominated by UK government as an expert to the Council of Europe Tech Facilitated Gender-Based Violence Committee. David has presented at conferences nationally and internationally and is a member of UK Council for Internet Safety and has recently been invited to be a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Coalition for Digital Safety. David has led the creation of a number of helplines that directly and indirectly support victims of online harm, probably most notably the Revenge Porn Helpline in 2015 that supports adults who are victims of non-consensual intimate image NCII abuse. David's going to address the non-consensual intimate image abuse and the helpline service they provide tonight, and he's advocating for confirmed non-consensual intimate images to be treated in the same way as child sexual abuse material. Consequently, following that, David has overseen the development of Stop NCII, the world's first device-side hashing technology, which empowers adults who experience NCII to prevent their images being shared online. I'm quite sure you can agree that David has led some pioneering work with development of multi-award winning resources, and with Plymouth University has published a number of groundbreaking research reports as well. So David, that was a big introduction. Over to you.
Right. Thank you ever so much, Claire. And so also thank you very much for the invitation to come and share some of this afternoon. So I've got some slides which we'll hopefully be sharing now. And I'm going to dive straight in, if that's okay with everybody. As Claire said, I'm David Wright. I'm CEO of the charity SWGFL. From our charitable, our primary purpose, you can see here that everyone should benefit from technology free from harm, and discharge that through a number of different aspects. So one that's causing or making the most demands on our charitable resources at the moment is, as Claire mentioned, one of our helplines, indeed, of the 3 helplines that we operate, but it is the Revenge Porn Helpline that's most relevant here, and what I want to talk to you about in terms of its experience, but also then leading on to stop NCII as well. So Claire mentioned back in 2015, we had the opportunity of creating the Revenge Porn Helpline, the first of its kind in the world. We support adults across the UK who are victims of non-consensual intimate image abuse. And it is indeed this one, I say, that's causing the most demand on our services. We disproportionately support women in this case. And I just want to flick on to the next slide, which each year we publish an annual report. This one, most recent one from 2024. There's lots of information on here, but I want to kind of articulate the caseload. And this best demonstrates the demand that is placed on us. So as recently as 2019, the team managed 1,600 cases. In 2020, that rose to 3,200 cases. By 2021, that had gone to 4,400 cases, to 8,900 cases in 2022. And by 2023, that leapt to 18,000 cases. 2024, this year, we see here, was over 22,000 cases. So over that 5-year period, we saw a 15-fold increase in caseload. And like I say, you can see from the data that's demonstrated before you, that's disproportionately we support women in this particular case. We always conclude that gender in our space, gender determines the harm that you experience. And so predominantly we disproportionately support women, and it's certainly where there's a relationship involved, it's usually a female victim and indeed a male perpetrator. So faced with that doubling of caseload every year, one of the questions that the team said is, how big is this problem? How big is the scale of the problem? So in March this year, we released some data that's predicated on 2 different bits of information. So in October last year, the National Police Chiefs Council published data that said 3,000 women a day report gender-based violence. That's 1 in 12 women in the country, 8.3%. Another report concluded that of gender-based violence, 17% experience NCII. So 17% of 8% is 1.42% of the entire adult female population. The data will conclude will experience NCII annually. From a UK perspective, to put that in numbers, that's 369,242, you can kind of see here, or visualize it even further, the entire adult female population of Birmingham will every year experience NCII, which equates to something like 3.2 million images each and every year, which is huge numbers. So that's also very sobering. Also suggests that last year, for every woman that we supported, there were 53 that we didn't. We're only supporting 2% of victims each year, so we need to work out clearly scale. So that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about here as well in terms of Stop NCII. So Claire mentioned StopNCI.org is a platform that's available for any adult anywhere in the world. It is the world's first device-side hashing technology, and it stands for those adults who are being threatened to have their intimate content from being shared online in terms of very practical response, essentially. And you can see here on the left-hand side, its mission is to be able to identify and prevent non-consensual intimate images from being shared online by empowering online platforms to be able to detect and identify the sharing of this content so that we can discharge the threat given the scale that I mentioned earlier on. Just to give you an idea, this is indeed a very short clip that explains a bit more.
Are you worried that somebody might share your intimate images online? You can take back control with StopNCII.org. StopNCII.org is available to anyone in the world over the age of 18. StopNCII.org creates a hash or a digital barcode of your intimate images or videos, meaning the content never needs to leave your device. Once the hash is created, the hash is sent to the StopNCII.org hash bank, which is then sent to an ever-growing network of participating platforms. The hash, which represents your content, will be sent to these participating platforms unless you wish to withdraw it. If someone ever tries to share your intimate image or video on any of these platforms, the hash will be matched and the content will be reviewed for removal. Once your content is removed by participating platforms, your dashboard on stopncii.org will be updated, keeping you informed along the way. StopNCII.org provides a simple process to prevent the non-consensual sharing of intimate images online, allowing people across the globe to regain control of their content.
Something that we are unbelievably proud of, as you can imagine. Here's just some kind of other metrics around Stop NCI. So we're currently protecting about 2 million images and videos. So it contains 2 million hashes, and we know it's worked 38,000 times, over 38,000 times. So lots of data and lots of information. There is another dimension to it in terms of the number of partners. These are the platforms who currently take the hashes, that we can prevent content from being shared on these platforms. As you can see, we have 16 here. We should be having thousands, to be honest, but it's a good start, and the ones that certainly we're reporting content to. It's equally important for us as well that we work and we'll use and support individuals across the world, as we work with 122 different NGOs around the world. So we can signpost victims when they arrive at Stop NCI, because they're inevitably going to need more help and support. Signpost them to other organisations like the Revenge Porn Helpline, where they can get some help and more support in their own country, their own language, and their own context as well. So that is really important for us too. I have been talking about adults here. In 2023, we did give the technology to the National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children in the States, and they created Take It Down. So what is just as much as Stop NCI stands for any adult, takeitdown.netmec.org stands for any child. And so between us, we have indeed the world's population served and kind of covered from this particular threat as well. And we cross-refer constantly and indeed all the time. So with my 7 minutes allotted, Claire, I just say questions, but clearly, as you say, we can pop that in the Q&A. Whistle stop kind of injection about Revenge Porn Helpline, some of the work that we do, and also stopnci.org. Claire, back to you.
That's fantastic, David. Thank you very much. Like David just mentioned, then if you've got any questions, put them in the chat and we will get to them at the end. But that's pretty spectacular, David. Thank you very much. The next person we are going to hear from is Jennifer Moses. Jennifer is our National Official for Equality and Training, who is going to talk to us today about relevant racialised sexism and misogyny and proposed racist approaches to sexual violence. So Jennifer, I'll pass over to you.
Thank you, Claire, and hi to everybody. And I think it's really good to see we have a good turnout this evening on the eve of this year's UN 16 Days of Activism. It started on the 25th of November, as Claire said, and officially around the world it ends tomorrow. But we know for many people, violence against women and girls is an everyday issue, so it doesn't end tomorrow. So it's really important that we continue to discuss this and, more importantly, come up with solutions and work collectively to address it. So we know violence doesn't begin and end at the school gate. We know increasingly it lives in our pockets, in our classrooms, on online spaces, where young people spend a lot of their lives, just like we do. And we heard about Sally's case earlier on today, which shows how digital violence and AI and online spaces can be devastating and harm people for many, many years. So is this a global issue? And I think it's really important that we discuss all aspects of digital violence. And so it's really timely, I think, that the UN have recognised that digital violence and technology should be a theme for the 16 Days of Activism that year. We need to confront these digital spaces. So we know that AI is transformative. It has a lot of benefits. I'm really pleased to see some of the work that David and the Southwest Grid for Learning is doing. I'm pleased that the NASUWT is working closely with Southwest Grid for Learning. And we know, as well as being transformative, it disrupts. It disrupts in terms of women's employment. It disrupts in terms of the experiences of women and girls on an everyday issue. So the impact of AI is not gender neutral, and you've heard some of the statistics today about how that is not the case. But what I wanted to talk specifically about today is an area that's often goes on talked about, unrecognised, and that is where race and sexism comes together. So I'm going to talk little bit about racialised sexual harassment and also what the NASUWT is doing generally on tackling sexual harassment and misogyny, but also misogynoir. And I will be talking broadly around the issue, using the terminology of black, and I think it's best I explain what we mean and how the NASUWT defines the term black. It's a broad, unifying term for people who have shared experiences of racism, colonialism and discrimination, and therefore collectively they identify for the anti-racist struggle. But it's important to notice this is more than skin colour. We know that when we talk about anti-racism, that it will also include perhaps people who are Gypsy Roma traveller, people who may be from the Jewish community. So it is a very broad and political spectrum. So I think it's important that we recognise that. So I wanted to very quickly talk about a misogynoir, which is a term that was coined by a scholar called Moya Bailey. Look it up. It's a term that's often you very rarely see, misogynoir, and it describes the specific and compounded form of racism and sexism that's directed at black women. And that doesn't mean that it should be seen as a separate issue. It shows that sexism and racism is quite often intertwined, and that a black woman's experiences of sexual harassment will be very different to the experience of a white woman, and is often treated very, very differently as well. And at this point, I think it's important to recognise the great work of the TUC, of a report that they did in 2024 called "And Then It Clicked." So that report was really helpful. NASWT was very much involved in the research and the groups that were focus groups that formed the report. And that gave us a lot of evidence and information that we don't often hear about black women's experiences in terms of sexual harassment. So that report showed that 65% of those who were surveyed said that they had experienced sexual harassment of a racialized form, which included things such as unwelcome advances, unwanted touching, or sexual jokes of a racialized nature. 73% said they were bullied or harassed, and 53% said they had reported racist remarks or racist comments. And what was quite stark about that is that 58% of those who experienced it, they had not reported it. That is very similar right across the board when we're talking about sexual harassment. Women quite often do not report it because they do not think they will be believed, or that it would be taken seriously. Work of the NASWT in the past has showed quite stark figures of predominantly women who have not reported sexual harassment, whether it be from pupils or from their colleagues. One, because there's no policies to support them getting some redress, or they don't think it will be taken seriously. So in terms of this research, and then it clicked by the TUC, many described the fact that being isolated, i.e. being the only person of colour or of a hidden identity in terms of racial and ethnic background, particularly in the classroom, they didn't feel that there was anyone that would recognise the specific nature of their harassment. Many talked about misogynoir. When they talk to people about misogynoir, they don't know the term, don't know what it means, and think that sexual harassment is just sexual harassment. So for many black women that work in education, they found that racialized sexual harassment they received was not only from colleagues, but also from pupils, parents and colleagues, and it was not taken seriously. Were told to consider it to be banter, or it was hidden under the carpet for fear of the school being labelled as racist or sexist. And as well as employment, we have to recognise that it also affects girls, especially Black girls. We know about the adultification of girls, of Black girls within schools and within society, and the impact that it has on them. We did some work with the UK Girl Guiding organisation this year, and they did their attitude survey. And that talked about girls, 85% of the girls that were in that girl guiding survey of age 11 to 21 said that they had experienced sexism, mainly from the online form. And it also affected younger girls as well. Harmful content, exposure to rude images, mean messages or mockery. So that again shows us that women and girls are not safe when we're talking about digital technologies and the advancement of digital technologies. And I'm pleased that Kat talked about the intersecting nature of sexual harassment. Kat talked about neurodivergent people, disabled and LGBTI people. And so it's really important that the work we do is intersectional. When we're talking about sexual harassment, we have to name what it means for people from those specific groups, because we know it lands differently for people from intersecting groups. So what can we do about it? As a movement, as a trade union movement, what can we do about it across the board? It's great also to hear from David about the work that they're doing with in terms of technology, and I know they've done some great work with some of our members who have gone to their professional helpline to speak to them about the impact of sexual harassment and what they can do about it. And it's brilliant that we've got that service there that works with us. So it's important that as a trade union, I think that we need to negotiate for workplace policies that not just have policies that protect all staff from all forms of harassment, but sexual harassment, but also to ensure that there is an intersecting nature to those policies. Quite often, there will be something that will protect the pupils, but the staff are left out from those policies. And those policies have to be intersectional. And there has to be support and trust. Anyone that goes to report sexual harassment, particularly if you're a Black woman and there's a racialised form of sexual harassment, they have to know that it's recognised and understood, and it should not be dismissed, because that dismissal can impact on the trauma that someone experiences with that respect. Things such as safeguarding. Safeguarding must consider not just gender, but also race, disability, sexuality, neurodiversity, because vulnerability is compounded for such marginalised groups. So we need to amplify the voices of Black women and girls and all women who experience sexual harassment. It's when we act collectively, we challenge not only the individual abuse, but the structural conditions that allow misogyny, and other forms of sexual harassment, and that it allows digital violence to persist. And that's why I'm pleased that our union, the NASUWT, has supported the full recommendations of the TUC report, and then it clicked, in terms of giving those spaces to those marginalised groups to speak their truth, and also, more importantly, for the union to act on those by negotiating, by upskilling our negotiators and our activists to recognise it, and also to act on behalf of all women who experience sexual harassment. So I'm really pleased that we've got this event. It's great that we've got this panel. I'm happy to take some questions at the end, Claire, if that's fine. And I think that might be my 7 minutes now.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Jennifer. Again, a reminder, questions in the Q&A box, please. And our final speaker for this evening is Katie Freeman-Taylor. Katie is the Head of Research and Policy at Internet Matters, a UK non-profit dedicated to supporting families in navigating the digital world safely and confidently. Katie has over a decade of experience in research and policy roles across third and public sectors, leading research initiatives that ensure the voices of parents, children and young people are heard by all with influence over children's digital lives. Katie's passionate about reducing inequality and fostering safe online environments. She regularly collaborates with industry, government, and academic partners to influence forward-thinking digital policy. So, Katie, over to you.
Lovely, thank you. I'm just going to get my screen up. There we go. Great, you can all see that fine? Yeah.
Yeah,
no?
we've got it.
Yeah, cool, great, thank you. And thank you very much for that introduction as well, Claire. So as Claire says, we are a not-for-profit. We exist to make the online world safer for children and young people. We do this in a range of ways, but one of the core ways we do this is via our website, where we have hundreds of free resources and guidance for parents and professionals, including teachers, to support children, to support them with managing children's online lives. And we do this because we know that parents and trusted adults, including teachers, are children's main source of information about online safety, and they're who children turn to as well when something goes wrong online. Today, I'm going to take you through some research that we've done in our work stream called Safeguarding Girls Online, so kind of give you some statistics about some of the issues and challenges that we see girls and women facing online, and then also talk briefly at the end about some of the resources that are available on our website to support conversations with children, whether that's in the classroom or at home. This is very much a whistle-stop tour of our research as well. So just to say, if you are interested in anything that I talk about today, all of our reports are available on our website, and they go into a lot more detail, including talking about kind of intersectionality that Jennifer and Kat have touched on so eloquently today as well. So one of our first reports that we published under this work stream explored, it was called It's Really Easy to Go Down the Wrong Path, and explored how parents and children view self-proclaimed misogynistic influencer Andrew Tate and the implications this can have for online and offline behaviour. And I think one of the key findings that really stood out to us from this research was that 56% of young dads has a positive view of Andrew Tate, and 40% agreed with the statement, people exaggerate how common misogyny is. And I think why this was such an important statistic for us is because of what I said at the beginning about parents playing such an important role in children and supporting them to navigate the online world. They're often where children first learn about the concept of misogyny from. So if parents are having this favourable view, that can have a negative impact on children as well, and why we need support in the classroom, for example, to challenge some of these beliefs if they're not being challenged at home, but also needing support for parents as well. And we also know that sort of misogyny and misogynistic influences also can have real online and offline consequences, and, for example, shaping intimate image sharing sort of beliefs and myths in that space as well. Next, we did a piece of research called our Digital Wellbeing Index, which looks at children and young people's experiences online. And last year, when we did this piece of research in 2024, we found that in the space of the year, the number of girls being contacted by strangers online increased significantly. And I think what was really sad about this when we spoke to girls about it was that for a lot of them, that was quite normalized. They said, this is just kind of part and parcel of being online, getting contacted by strangers, and didn't see it as really a big deal. And then perhaps even more shocking from that, we also found that parents were starting to think that as well. And you can see a quote there from one of the mothers in our research, which sort of says, having intimate image shared with their child, it was so standard, it's not noteworthy, I just blocked it and moved on, which is not, the kind of message we want to be sending. We also have done some research looking at kind of the best ways of potentially sort of changing attitudes and teaching about intimate image sharing in schools. So we did a piece of research called Shifting the Dial, and there were some really helpful, I think, findings. We tested a couple of different methods for teaching about intimate image sharing in schools, and lots of these, it can be quite tough, I think, for teachers to teach about these topics for a range of different reasons. So ensuring that they have the support resources in place to be able to teach effectively is really helpful. So we've used a lot of our findings to kind of recommend to government and other organisations about how we could potentially improve that experience for children and young people of teaching sensitive topics like intimate image abuse. And then finally, in this work stream, we did a piece of research at the end about this time last year, which looked at how intimate image abuse and kind of online violence against women and girls is changing, and specifically looked at the rise of new deep fakes. So those are AI generated images or videos that are made to look like real images. There's a sort of awful tools that are quite easily accessible and available where you can upload an image and that can be turned into a pornographic or sexualized image. The vast majority of these images are of women and girls, and some of these models don't even work on boys and men. Obviously, in the UK, any image of a child would be considered child sexual abuse material and is illegal, but that doesn't, these models that are being used, and even sometimes for children, which are illegal, they're still existing out there and reasonably accessible, and that's a challenge that we face. And we actually just updated this research and hopefully we'll publish it shortly, but we've found that these models are still reasonably accessible. So this is something that we need to kind of continue to push government and hold people to account around. I think it was also quite shocking in the research we did last year that a number of children had already encountered a new deepfake, so whether that had been seeing an image that had been created or maybe creating one themselves. And this number's likely to have grown, obviously, in the space of the last year as well. In a bit more of a positive light, there is some sort of government progress in this space and kind of reducing violence against women and girls. So we are expecting the VOG strategy imminently. So fingers crossed that there's some really strong measures in that. There has been a lot of attention on violence against women and girls online in this government. And Ofcom recently published guidance called A Safer Life Online for Women and Girls, encouraging tech platforms to do more to keep women and girls safe online. There was also a pornography review that had a number of excellent recommendations around, supporting sort of safer and more healthy engagement with pornography, reducing violence against women, and some of the kind of areas that are illegal offline. There was recommendations about making those illegal online, along with kind of education resources as well. So there's some really good opportunities, I think, to improve the state of kind of violence against women and girls, especially in the online space. But that doesn't mean there can't be more. So one of the challenges of the guidance that Ofcom produced about recommendations for platform is it's just guidance. Platforms don't have to follow it. It's not statutory. So I think there's definitely room to improve there. The review that was done on pornography had a number of excellent recommendations, but the government is yet to fully respond to how they are going to implement those recommendations. We have been calling for a ban on nudification apps, so that's the tools used to make nude deepfakes, and that's something we continue to call for, and we're really hopeful that potentially in the VOG strategy from government there might be some movement on that. And we'd also really like to see online pornography regulated in the same way that offline pornography is as well. So while there's been some good progress, we're not quite there. There's definitely more that can be done. And then the last thing I just wanted to touch on in my 7 minutes was, as I said, on our website, we have hundreds of free resources available, primarily for parents and carers, but we also have something, a platform called Digital Matters, which is for teachers. This is just an example of one of the hubs we have on our site. So if you wanted to have a conversation with a child about misogyny, or if you wanted to understand, maybe more about some of those misogynistic influences or what children and young people are seeing, our hub on this can give you more advice and support in that space. And then this is just a list of some of the other sort of resources we have. We have, FAQs about various different technologies, including deep fakes. We have sort of conversation starters around misogyny, intimate image abuse. As I said, we have Digital Matters, which is our teachers hub, and that includes a module on teaching about intimate image sharing, or image sharing in general, actually. And if you are interested in any of this, they're able to sign up to our newsletter, but also can do that via our website as well. So a little bit of a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully some helpful information for the conversation.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Katie. And thank you to every one of you who've spoken to the members tonight. We do have a few questions. David, I see that you've been answering some questions already, so thank you very much for that, but I will read them out when we get to them as well. I'm going to start, Sally, with you. Cara's been asking, did your former SLT receive training as it sounded like they acted in dereliction, later even rewarding the student, thereby undermining you and your other colleague, let down by SLT. The SLT role modelling, at least, then is inept at the very least.
Yeah, so I suppose the first point is that we took a grievance, a joint grievance against them in the aftermath of the court case when the pupil was found guilty. He had left the school at that point, but we took them to the Labour Relations Agency over here. So we went to tribunal with them. The tribunal found in our favour, and one of the recommendations was that they looked at the process whereby they had made the decision. And as we like to say in Northern Ireland, they basically set up a task force that was marking their own homework. So again, even though we objected to that task force because it was made up, there was only two people on it that hadn't been involved in the original decision or had heard from the other, my colleague and I during the process, or had been part of other panels that we presented to. So first of all, I suppose they didn't really, there were recommendations as part of that Labour Relations report. The other thing that they were instructed to do was undertake mediation with me and my colleague, which we did do. And I also had mediation with another member of the SLT. So I had extensive mediation with my principal, the chair of the Board of Governors, and also two other male members. We did do a refusal to teach ballot, and come the September, when they could have refused to teach him, 6 members of staff who were all female continued to teach the pupil. So I was the only person that actually stood by that. They left the NASUWT as a result of that. And when I asked to have mediation with them, they refused to have it. And again, it was about how I wanted to really get them to understand that what had happened to me and my colleague was sexual abuse. And I think I didn't reference this earlier, but the real struggle that we have is the fact that when it's technology assisted abuse and it's non-touch based, it's really difficult for people to understand that it can have a similar impact to people on the victim survivor as touch based assault. And I think we're starting to see more education around that, particularly now with the rise of AI. I'd also just like to say that I continue to teach in that school, and that's where I teach now. And that wouldn't have happened without the mediation. So it was helpful because we went for a position from a position of them not recognizing what happened as a sexual assault to recognizing that, but also a shift away from victim blaming, where they basically felt that the school would always be known as the upskirting school because of me. And because I had made the point that I wouldn't stop until we changed the law and I would start talking about it. And I suppose I would say there was some learning there because then when we had an incident where teachers in the school where a fake Instagram had been put up and there were like kind of these fake news stories set up about various colleagues that were sexual in nature. Actually, they handled it completely different. They were transparent about the process. They wrote to parents. They wrote to the staff, and they had a better understanding then of the impact it was having on those people. So there was some learning there. But again, I'm still pushing for that sort of training. And I think somebody mentioned it earlier. I think it was Jennifer in her presentation. At the key to all of this was they wanted to protect the institution and the reputation of the institution. And as we know, silence is complicity. And, that was very much the case in the school. So rather than a culture of objectification, it was basically a disregard of my rights for dignity and respect in the workplace. And I think, as well as Jennifer mentioned, and probably Kat as well, there was no policy in place that protected me, but there were a policy in place to protect the pupil. So, that all of that kind of created this perfect storm for them to actually cause a huge amount of harm to me and my colleague by their actions.
Thanks, Sally. I think you've actually just covered Natasha's question
Yeah.
as well, because she was asking whether it's a culture of objectification or disregards of rights of the employee. And I think you've kind of covered that there, isn't it?
Yeah, and I suppose the one thing that I would say was that was how I felt, because obviously the difficulty was I didn't know he was doing it. So, and then we watched the videos under the process of the judicial review. And at that point, I was just totally devastated because my trust had been completely shattered. Because ultimately, if the pupil was doing that and other pupils definitely knew that that was going on, like, how can you trust anybody? And it comes back, I suppose, to what David and Katie were referencing there. Like, they just point blank refused to investigate whether he'd shared the images. So, there was no, like, why was he taking them? Why had he kept them? Why did he still have the USB? So I just have to live with the fact that there are pupils out there that would have seen those images taken up my skirt. So, the objectification of me was kind of connected to a lot of victim blaming culture about what I wore, how I presented myself, my relationship with my pupils in terms of, it's drama, it's very open. So yeah.
Can I just ask, what were the other pupils' reactions like to the fact that he had done this?
Well, nobody talked about it. So at all, there was a complete culture of silence. Nobody talked about it. Nobody did anything. Nobody said anything. I think I was most disappointed by the fact that even though I knew staff members objected to the fact he'd been a prefect, nobody said anything. You know, and I suppose that's why my focus is on the bystander approach and right, how do we shift? And we know this in trade union activism because it's really difficult to get people to put their head above the parapet. But ultimately, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And I know categorically, if this had happened to one of my colleagues, I would have been complaining about the fact he'd been made a prefect, and nobody did. And I suppose, your point about how did the pupils react? Well, the most sort of heartwarming story is eventually I had 4 girls in my sixth form, only 4 girls, and I said, I won't be in school because I'm going to court. And you probably know why, and I'm not allowed to speak about it. And then there was this outpouring from them about what they knew and what had been said. But when we come back in from that victory in court, there were a few members of staff who came over and sort of quietly congratulated us. But I walked into that classroom with that 4 girls, and they had this little tea party for me. They bought we had coffee and they had cake. But most importantly, they gave me a thank you card and they said, thank you for standing up for us because you have taught us how you're such a role model and you have taught us to stand up for ourselves. And just recently, actually, and I'll finish on this point, Claire, but just recently I had a message from one of those students, and I mean, we're talking, this is, 2019, who said she had to challenge some sexual harassment in her workplace, and it was by her boss. And she said, I wouldn't have done that if I hadn't had seen what you went through, and you were such a positive effect on me that I knew I had to and could stand up. And she was very well supported in her workplace. So, that is the ultimate thing. We have to teach young people how to respond. We have to be the role models. And I think that is how I try to live in this world now and encourage other people to do the same.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Sally. Jennifer, I'm just going to come to you because I've seen you nodding away there when Sally was speaking. Jennifer's thinking, what's she going to ask me now? Sally was talking about people not wanting to put their head above the parapet. Do you think that that's part of the reason why maybe the term misogynoir isn't so well known? Maybe we're not shouting about it as much as we should be doing, or that our Black women members don't feel that they can speak openly about it?
It's an interesting point, Claire, and some of the women that I've spoken to or involved in studies said that often when they report it and said that the sexual harassment was racialised, they often said, and unashamedly, some of our caseworkers have said, well, is it sexism or racism? It's one or the other. You can't have both.
Right.
Which is quite scary. And I said, well, actually, there were racialised tones to the sexist attitude, issues about touching Black women's hair, and sexualizing them and objectifying them in a way that is racialized. So as there is that lack of understanding and lack of awareness, there are many Black women who do not come forward. It's almost, dare to say it, it's almost easier to say, yes, it's racism, but it's harder to say, it's almost easier to say it's sexism and almost harder to say it's racism or misogynoir because of that lack of understanding. Yeah, and just one quick point I wrote an article for Education International based on the research, and then it clicked, and I called it when it clicks, you just cannot unsee it. Because one of the things that came out of the report, that some of those black women hadn't even realised that what they'd experienced was sexual harassment. It had become so institutional and normalised, particularly within the workplace and within schools, that they didn't report it because they felt that this was normal behaviour. And this, particularly if you're a teacher, and this came from a pupil, there's almost the attitude, and I know, Sally, this will resonate with you, that, well, you're the adult. So, it's just a bit of banter, just a bit of playful stuff that you need to put up with, which is, really harmful to the victim survivor who has experienced that trauma. So there is an education piece for us in terms of educating women and young girls that this is not right and you don't have to put up with it. So it's really heartwarming to hear that your story, Sally, about those young girls actually recognising that's something they don't need to put up with. It's really good.
Thanks,
Thank
Jennifer.
you.
I think you're right, because I was just about to say myself, this is a piece of work that this recognising intersectionality between the for our members to be able to convey that in their workplaces, I think, because we're educators, and if we're not educating our pupils to spot the intersectional elements of sexual harassment or violence against women and girls, then we're not doing our job. But in the same breath, as a union, if our own members and our own caseworkers aren't recognising it, then that's a bigger piece of work as well, isn't it? On that, Kat, Natasha has mentioned about intersectionality needing to be examined. But Ro has spoken, you were talking about the cars being taken away from disabled women, disabled people, potentially. And she's saying that as a woman, she wouldn't necessarily like to tackle someone who'd used one of the disabled parking spaces without having a blue badge. And we know that people do that anyway. But as a disabled woman, how would you kind of steel yourself against what potentially might come from you if you chose to attempt to tackle that?
I mean, it's a really, really complex it's very complex in terms of accessible parking. I could do 30 minutes. Anyone who knows me knows I could probably talk for a long period of time about disabled parking and then the same length of time about accessible toilets. The law in this country doesn't really protect disabled people. And I think there are lots of different kind of situations. I think the main issue that's happening at the moment is genuine people with blue badges are getting asked to justify why they've got that blue badge. And it's very, very difficult to, like, I know Catherine, I spoke to Catherine on email about this in the week. I've got to the point, even I, as a wheelchair user who's a really quite confident person, I don't want to go out because I'm being watched when I get out of the car. I'm being glared at by people that think I'm too young to have a blue badge. So there's quite a culture of that. But then there's this other very difficult culture where people don't understand things like the reasons why you've got hatched areas on the side of the car. And the reason you've got that is so the doors can open widely and so that wheelchairs can get up there, so you can get into the car. People have extenders for seats. Some people have ramps to get into the car that are side ramps or back ramps. And I think there's a common kind of experience where I've experienced a lot of, and I don't want to kind of impact anyone else in any other profession, but a lot of taxi drivers or Uber delivery drivers who have actually visibly blocked the car door and things like that. And I had to say it was a few weeks ago, and I was like, I'm really sorry, but I can't actually get to my car. And he looked at me and looked at the car and went and just shrugged. And I was like, no, I need to get my wheelchair. And I did face quite a lot of aggression for that. So I think it's very difficult there. The situation also situations can be very different as well. So in schools, obviously, there's no legal protection in schools. We have a constant battle in our school in terms of we have probably the most accessible bays I've seen in any school, but we still get people parking in them, parents, and it's that education of staff. And I think like Jonathan and Sally have talked about is quite often the staff don't really understand them. It's just convenient. They've got lots of bags. They only see me. They're like, oh, one disabled person being dropped off. I don't need to leave any other spaces. Where in reality, we have a number of staff who have stress risk assessments that, for whatever reason, normal risk assessments, they have to have those bays. There's a lot of talk about provision in terms of just non-existent provision in education. So there's lots of people are having to park on the road, where they might be limited in where they can park, and their blue badge might be, if they're having to park on a single yellow line because that's the nearest place to school, they've potentially got 4 hours and they might have to go and move their car at lunchtime. So one of the biggest issues in schools and education is the lack of provision and the lack of understanding in schools. I've been trying to campaign for a universal trust blue badge system, accessible parking system, because you might have, for example, women who are on who are pregnant or just returned from maternity leave, who may need access to those bays for other reasons. And there's no provision for that. You might go to another school, and the commonest one is the minibus is parked in the disabled bay. So in terms of schools, the provision is extremely poor. I'm really lucky. I have got a supportive head teacher, and he is a constant battle of education. So in schools and workplaces, it's education. We've tried to get motions conference about it. It's one of the biggest issues our disabled members speak about. I know that for lots of people, they kind of like, oh, it doesn't affect me, so I'm not going to vote for it. But I'd really a big plea to really, if you can support our equality motions at conference, please support our equality motions. So 1/5 of working age people are disabled, and it's the one equality group that you could actually join at any time in your life without knowing. So please support those motions, because we could have got that to conference. What we could have changed policy wise would have been huge. In terms of other situations, it's very, very hard. There's a lot of supermarkets where the blue badge isn't enforceable. They'll say that, oh, you can be fined £80, but it's not enforceable. What I try and do is, if there's particularly bad, I will go in and I report it always to the shop staff rather than tackle the person, because you need to kind of protect yourself. There are going to be occasions when genuinely someone's forgotten their blue badge and they need access to that space. It's very difficult in those situations because they're not necessarily legally bound by the same laws. Most of the parking bays that are outside residential properties are also kind of not enforceable, and you're relying on the goodwill of people around you. That can also be another tension point for violence and aggression towards disabled people, and that actually did happen to me. So we had a disabled bay put outside the car. A disabled bay put outside the house, and the neighbour next door decided that because it was an inch over their walk past their wall, that they were going to park in the disabled bay, and it got to the point where we were experiencing abuse from her on a very regular basis. She was waking us up at stupid o'clock in the morning, calling me a benefit scrounger through the walls, and this is an experience which is repeated across the country. It's not a one-off experience. Hundreds and thousands of disabled people, and some of these are disabled women who are living on their own, are experiencing the same situation. And in those situations, it's very, very hard. The police didn't really want to know, even though it met the definition for a hate crime or a hate incident. They just weren't interested, and it was just treated. It was not a hate crime. It was classed as a civil disagreement between two neighbours. And I'm like, at what point do being shouted abuse at because I'm disabled, is that not a disability hate crime? So you can start to see the issue that creates. When it comes to council bays, if it's a council bay, I would take a picture and I would get it sent into the council. They have reporting. That's the safest way to do it. I would advise.
I'm going to stop
you
there.
Can stop you there. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks very much for that. I'm going to bring us back to the digital abuse, and I'm going to actually go to a question that, David, you did answer, but then I'm going to throw in another question which hopefully yourself and Katie will be able to answer jointly for me. So one of the questions that we got was, how do we tackle, and Katie, you might want to jump in here as well, how do we tackle revenge porn and manipulation of images by AI? And David, you said that you're looking at implementing ways that stop NCII can help, and the government have signalled that they intend to strengthen the law. But you've also added that victims suffering from NCII doesn't really matter if the content is genuine or synthetic because the impact is exactly the same. I was wondering if you'd like to say a little bit more about that.
Yes, thank you, Claire. Forgive me for starting to answer the questions. So I mean exactly that. So the Revenge Porn Helpline is there to support victims of NCII, and it's irrelevant if the content is synthetic or genuine. The impact on individuals is exactly the same, and so that there are dimensions that perhaps make it a little harder, given that the individuals may not necessarily have the content because somebody else may well have had it for you. And from a very technical perspective, sometimes we use copyright laws to get content removed. So if you've taken an image of yourself and shared it with it, you actually own the copyright for that image. But if somebody else creates an image of you, which is synthetic, they own the copyright for that image. So, that technicality that we have in terms of copyright infringement is often one ways that we actually have content removed. The Revenge Porn Helpline is all about content takedown. So we exist largely to receive and support victims by getting content removed now. So between 90 and 95% of the content we report is taken down. We've removed nearly 500,000 images over the duration that the helpline has existed, which does, whilst it's quite a high percentage, that does render sort of between 50 and 100,000 images that we've not been able to, so forgive me, 50,000 images that we've not been able to get removed. So like I say, synthetic or genuine from our perspective has little bearing short of some of the impacts and the technicalities that we operate under. One of the things that we want to see from a Stop NCI perspective is where you've got an image, you've created a hash as a victim. If it's synthetic, you may not have that image on your device to create the hash. So one of the things we're seeing in different countries in the US, the Take It Down Act, which will give victims the right to report content and to have that content taken down within 48 hours. If it's not, then for every day that image exists on that platform, the FTC have the powers to fine that company $55,000 per image per day whilst that image exists online. So when content is being reported to platforms like we do, what we also want is that that platform will then create a hash of itself and insert that into Stop NCI, so it acts as a signal, just like a victim does. So we can immediately stop the propagation, particularly of celebrity content. So when Taylor Swift's image is viewed 47 million times within an hour, we can actually stem that by sharing that or that in that platform, inserting the hash of that image to then stop that kind of propagation. So that's one of the ways that Stop NCI is kind of potentially helping to do with the creation of synthetic NCII.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. Katie, is there anything you want to add to that?
Nothing significant. I think just to kind of echo there shouldn't be so much of a distinction between kind of synthetic created images or AI generated images. We know that for a lot of children and young people, they say that actually those images are potentially more scary because they might not know who created them, may not be aware of them, and they're actually creating fear and anxiety already just having that technology available. So I think that, we don't want to think anything less of those images or not put them in the same category. And then the other thing, just to say, I emphasize this when I was speaking, but, we think that banning these tools in the UK and not having the websites accessible, rather than sort of individually creating laws around kind of sharing them, I think that's important, but that would also go some way to reducing the amount of content in circulation, given how readily available these models are.
Thanks. I'm going to throw this last question open to everybody, but Katie and David, I'm going to come to you first because we've had a couple of people mention red pill content and whether that is making things increasing digital violence against women and girls. So for people who don't know, this red pill content is referring to online material primarily from Manosphere, which is claiming to reveal some kind of hidden reality for men in modern society, suggesting kind of like that feminism oppresses them, encouraging men to reject mainstream feminist ideals and seeing men as victims who need to wake up. Do you think that that idea of the red pill content is increasing digital violence against women and girls? David, Katie?
For me, I'm not entirely sure I'm able to make any comment about that. You know, we support victims of NCII, and it's all about, you say, practical responses that we can afford those individuals. I would actually add just actually something. Sorry, forgive me on the previous question to Katie. I could totally get the point, and you know, I'm optimistic that the government is going to strengthen the law with regards to nudification apps. It does cast me back. In March, we reported 29 different nudification apps to the App Store or to Apple, who then promptly, to their credit, took those apps down, citing, "Yep, that's great, thanks. Can you let us know if you find any more apps like that?" It's like, hang on a minute. It's not our job to police your app store. What are you doing to stop these content being on in the first place? Why is it's not our job? So we were quite taken aback with that. So Katie, you're absolutely right. You know, these apps and services have no place in our society. And so, like I say, optimistic that the government will strengthen the law that will actually kind of outlaw and prevent this type of content. But coming back to your original question, I don't think that's necessary for me to best placed to respond.
Thanks, David.
What I can say is I'm, don't have causal kind of evidence, but I do have some research in the space. So I think we know that children, young people are exposed to that manosphere content. There was some great research coming out of, I think, a Dublin University where they looked at they set up accounts of young or boys on social media and found that, within 20 minutes, every single one of those accounts had been served up some form of manosphere content. So it's certainly out there, it's certainly circulating. And when we did our research looking at Andrew Tate, we did find that that was influencing offline behaviours, and there's additional research that's been done by York University as well that looks at the kind of impact that that's having on attitudes towards teachers. Particularly in our research, we looked at how it kind of normalised intimate image abuse and sharing of images amongst teens and kind of the expectations around that as well. So I definitely think there is a link there. I think, and also, what I will say is things can be done about this as well. It's not a helpless situation. There is, platforms can remove this content, whether that's actively before it goes into algorithmic feeds, whether that's once it's been reported. We know that with Andrew Tate, for example, he doesn't have any accounts of his own anymore because they've been deplatformed, they've been demonetized, and that has had an impact on the amount of his content that has been shared. It still obviously pops up, and he's not the only manosphere influencer. There's different people coming up all the time, but there are ways to detect this and ways to detect what's going on, through AI moderation, through reporting functions, etc. So there's definitely needs to be an onus on platforms, and that is what the Safer Life Online Ofcom's content does. A lot of work around kind of reducing the circulation of this content. But as I said, it is just recommendations, and there isn't a requirement on platforms. So we really need to kind of hold government to account if that doesn't measurably reduce the amount of content that's circulating.
That's great, Katie. Thank you. Before I come to you, Sally, because I can see you've unmuted. Kat, could you put the link to your petition in the chat, please, so that people can find that?
Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. Sally.
Yeah, I suppose one of the things that we have to realize as teachers and as parents is that young people, and particularly boys, are finding their tribes online. So they're actually, that is where they are learning about, how to be a man. And, we've moved away from the village being one that is around role models in their communities, but also they're finding their role models online. I think we also have to acknowledge the fact that, these platforms are making a huge amount of money, and until we actually ban them, and it's going to perpetuate itself because there's money to be made, and that's ultimately what's driving the lack of intervention, I think, at sort of governmental level, and within the platforms themselves. I suppose what we need to be having is those conversations and moving away from talking about toxic masculinity, because I think that that shuts boys out of the conversation, and it reinforces this idea that they're constantly to blame. But if we look at the triad of male violence, the reality is the majority of violence against women is committed by men. The majority of violence against men is committed by other men, and also the rise and the rate of suicide is men committing violence against themselves. So we have to look at how we actually encourage and support our young boys and men, and how we engage with them to tackle those feelings of loneliness and not knowing who they are, and therefore being hooked very quickly on this misogynistic content, which doesn't start out as misogynistic. I think my brother maybe told me about a story of like looking at tips for the gym, and very soon went down a rabbit hole that was really very disturbing content. And I suppose it's also about how we talk to young boys and men, young men in our spheres of influence, about how they talk about their feelings and how they develop their support networks and how they show up as a man for women in their lives. In Northern Ireland here, the disturbing, and this touches on another question, and our conversations around intersectionality, it was found that half of the men that took to the streets in Northern Ireland in August, rioting, and calling for the protection of women, that kind of racist merging of the far right with this idea that they're protecting women and girls. The far right and misogyny are bedfellows. Ultimately, the far right believes that women and girls should be lesser than men. So then they want to keep women in their place, and yet they go onto the streets pretending to be defending our rights. And ultimately, it was found that nearly half of those men that were on the streets and were arrested had also prior convictions for domestic abuse. So we need to start challenging that far right narrative and disrupting it. And actually talking about how you actually protect women and girls as a man, and how you stand up for them and stand beside them and stand with them, and that gender equality benefits everybody.
I think that's really useful, Sally. I mean, there was another question in the chat around the far right and challenging the far right, but there is kind of a sea change around terminology, rather than referring to it as toxic masculinity, looking at the positive masculinity and how that might start to begin to change the way in which boys are seeing their masculinity. But we also, for one of our equalities training development days, the one that's just gone, we did some work. We had White Ribbon Campaign coming and speaking to us about exactly that, about how boys and men can be kind of those positive images that we want to see for supporting women and supporting girls, rather than having this echo of toxic masculinity being thrown at them. So actually the webinar for that is on the NASUWT website as well. So please do have a look at the webinar around the White Ribbon Campaign as well, because that's really one way in which we can support the boys that we are teaching in redefining, if you like, what their masculinity means.
Can I just bring in one last point there? Sorry, Claire. And I think the other thing is we need to look at our male colleagues within the trade union movement, and they need to be on this call with us. They need to be on this panel with us. They need to be speaking out. It's not a women's issue, it's a men's issue that needs to be tackled. So I'm delighted that David has joined us on the panel. It'd be interesting to see what the makeup of our audience is. But I think what we need to focus on as we move forward as a trade union movement is hearing men's voices in this room, in this conversation, and that they are champion ending violence against women and girls as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Sally. And the fact that, I do want to congratulate our male colleagues who are on this call tonight, and hopefully can encourage their colleagues to have a look at this webinar once it's on our website. Just a little bit of housekeeping for you before we let you go. There's a link to Jennifer's report around sexual harassment, racism, intersectionality, misogynoir. That is on there for you to have a look at. There's Kat has also put the link in around the Disabled People Demand Action on Hate Crime petition. We are going to send the links out to you and send a link to the video as well. So please do use the information that you've seen tonight. And I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank everybody again for the information that you've shared, for the time you've given tonight. And I hope it's been an interesting webinar for those people who were listening in. Thank you very much for your questions, and I look forward to seeing all of you in the near future.